Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started then? Welcome and thank you for joining us for a discussion on NG9-1-1 and GIS innovation, insights from emerging leaders. I am Sandy Dyer and I'm from the DataMark team and I'll be the moderator for today's session. I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording this session, so you'll receive a link after the close of the session, probably in about a week or so, that'll allow you to go back and view the session again. Because we are recording, all attendees have been muted for quality assurance purposes. Now, we love to have questions of our participants, so please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat section of this platform. We'll answer the questions throughout the session. Then we have a short at the end, a Q&A portion if you want to hold it till then. Steph's going to help monitor that, so she may interrupt us to share a question, just to let you know. Now, today's discussion is going to focus on 5 areas, and it's technical innovation, leadership, engaging stakeholders, team building, and mentorship or cultivating early career professionals. Now, what I'd like to do first is start with a short level set for today's discussion. Let's talk about what is Next Generation 9-1-1. Now, if you've joined a DataMark webinar before, especially with me, you've heard this explanation, but just in case we have new attendees, I think this level set's going to be important. So Next Generation 9-1-1 is a complete replacement of our current 911 system. And what does that mean? So what we have to do is we have to replace today's 911 system with new and improved technologies and ways of doing business. And we're going to do that by replacing today's voice-only analog network with a network that's capable of voice, data, and media. So pictures and video, real-time text. Think of all those ways that you communicate today that are non-voice that currently our 911 system is not capable of consuming. So we have to put in a network in order to consume all these new ways of communicating. And the network itself is called an Emergency Services IP network or an EZNet. You may hear that terminology quite a bit. Now, the other aspect that we have to replace is today's 911 call handling equipment that's used by our public safety answering points or PSAPs. Now, for those that don't know, a PSAP is just a fancy term for a 911 call center. And the 911 call centers today, the equipment they use only really is capable of consuming that voice analog network. And again, considering all the new ways of communication that happens today and the abilities that our 911 centers need to have, they have to upgrade their equipment in order to be able to consume that. And then lastly, we're going to replace our current tabular data sets like the Master Street Address Guide and our current programming with GIS. You know, if you've joined a DataMark webinar before, you know we've talked about all the required GIS data sets that have been set by the National Emergency Number Association to support NG9-1-1. That GIS is going to be used for 911 call location validation and routing. So in legacy 911, based on those tabular databases and the way that the network currently functions, the 911 caller has to kind of find 911, where in Next Generation 9-1-1, the intent is for the 911 system to find the caller, which is why we have to improve everything that we do. Now, Next Generation 9-1-1 is actually a sum of all its parts, and there are more parts than most realize. To have one aspect, say an EZNet, or even 2, to have the EZNet and the 911 call handling equipment, doesn't make you an end-to-end NENA i3 Next Generation 9-1 system. Now, for those that may not be familiar with NENA, NENA is an ANSI standards body, and the i3 solution is actually the i3 standard surrounding NG9-1-1. And just like there are multiple parts of an NG9-1 system, there's a need for a new group of partners or stakeholders to be involved in each aspect of NG9-1-1. Most importantly, you need a champion who's orchestrating all of that. And our leaders today are those champions. They carry the vision, knowledge, and experience to architect, orchestrate, and deploy NG9-1-1. Okay, so let's get started now that we've level set. There we go. So I'd like to introduce today's leaders. Actually, what I would like is for today's leaders to introduce themselves because they're going to do a much better job of it than I would. So Leah, would you mind starting us off by sharing a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy. Also, I'm glad this is being recorded. I might use you as that first intro part as an educator tool here in Alabama, particularly with our legislators. You did that beautifully, so thank you. I'm Leah Misseldine. I'm the executive director for the Alabama 911 board. I've been in 911 for I'll start my 24th year in August. I think it's a great time to be in 911. I actually kind of stumbled into 911 working retail while I was in college, but I come from the PSAP, so I've sat in the chair. I've done a lot of things over the lifespan of 911 in my career that I think we'll probably talk about a little bit later that I wasn't expecting, and utilize GIS in ways that I didn't even know that's what I was doing. And here we are for Next Generation 911, and I look very much forward to our conversation today, the questions that the audience has, and being with these ladies.
Thank you, Bam. Monica?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Monica Million. I've been in the space for going on 23 years. Much like Leah, I started out as a 911 telecommunicator, worked my way up. I managed a center. Then I worked at the state level in Colorado here for 4.5 years. And now, like Leah, I'm not like Leah, but I'm in the private sector now for about 10 months working for Amazon Web Services. I've also served on the NINA board of directors for 5 years, and I co-chair the Women in 911 Alliance and the International Collaboration for Emergency Number Services. Excited to be here.
Thank you, Bam. And Christy?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm honored to join these wonderful ladies in this presentation. I am the director for a regional 911 center in the heart of Texas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we serve over 40 PSAPs. And we have made it our mission to be early adopters of new technology that will transform the 911 industry. And so we started our journey to Next Gen 911 back in 2008. And it has been a long journey, obviously, but we continue on that journey as we move forward. We've been through several challenges and hurdles, but the good news is, guys, it's all possible and there is a better tomorrow ahead of us. So I look forward to our presentation together.
And Christy, you've, I thought I had read in your bio that you have an early adopter summit that you host now.
Yes, we do have an early adopter summit that meets at least once a year, typically in the winter. And this brings together early adopters so that we can share our ideas, our challenges, how we've gotten through things. We are a group that appreciate and enjoy piloting new technology, and we work with a lot of disruptors in the industry and some startup companies that have unique technological opportunities for the 911 industry.
And I know that I personally have appreciated Christy's early adopter mindset while co-chairing the NINA work group for PSAP readiness for real-time text. Christy was an early adopter and not only challenged what we were putting together in the document, but also identified areas that the I3 document had to be improved and for it to actually work properly, being real-time text. So if you're an early adopter, I encourage you to reach out to Christy to be a part of what she's doing. Now, each leader in today's discussion, as you can tell, is going to bring a different perspective to NG9-1 implementation and the efforts that they've taken. And this was, so I want to share that this was, everyone that we reached out to was purposefully chosen for that reason, because we know that so many of the folks that are learning about NG9-1 and that join our webinars come from different levels of responsibility and wanted to be able to bring you different perspectives. So like Leah, through her role as the executive director of the Alabama 911 board, she's deployed a statewide NG9-1 solution that encompasses 85 emergency communication districts, where Monica, in her previous role with the executive director of the Colorado Resource Center, led local education participation efforts in a state where home rule governs, and it's a true locally driven to statewide connectivity scenario. And then Christy, as director of 911 for the North Central Texas emergency communications district, like she said, with her 40 PSAPs, she represents a true regionalized approach to NG9-1, where her districts will come together with neighboring 9-1 districts and COGs to create a statewide NG9-1 system. So please ask your questions, learn things. I really think you're going to enjoy today's discussion. Now, it is truly a discussion. And while I have started with some questions to help lead the conversation, I really wanted to encourage our leaders to take this in a direction that they feel is appropriate. So let's start with our first question. We're going to start with Leah. So given all the various aspects of NG9-1-1, the EZNet, the 911 call handling solution, the GIS, the next generation core services that will hold that GIS, what efforts have been taken to implement one or all of these aspects of the NG9-1 environment in your state?
So we took a plate of spaghetti to start with and just kind of threw it against the wall to see what stuck. No, in all seriousness, some days it feels that way. But Sandy, you've already talked about all the various and sundry things that we've gone about. We do have an EZNet deployed to all of our PSAPs. We have 106 primary PSAPs in the state of Alabama that we deliver calls to today. We have a statewide text deployment as far as text to and from 911. So it can be PSAP generated or generated from the public accessing 911. We're probably eyebrow deep, maybe not eyeball deep, but eyebrow deep in our GIS, a statewide GIS data set, which has all been done at the local level up until now. You talked about it a little bit earlier, transitioning from the tabular world to the spatial world, and just asking folks to do GIS in a way that they've never done it before.
Right.
And so we've also embarked on some hosted call handling solutions. That's one thing that we encountered in our EZNet deployment, that there's a lot of handoff and hand holding to make all of those systems work together and to make certain that you're successful in that. And it takes an inordinate amount of coordination and time. So have that conversation often, early, in the middle, late. Continue to have all of those types of conversations and educate. Advocate. Tell people what you're doing and just start the conversation. I love Christy's description earlier about being a disruptor and an early adopter. And I've heard people say, you're on the bleeding edge. And I'm like, I'm not sure I want to be. However, here we are. We've also had more than one attempt at an EZNet deployment in the state of Alabama. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. Sometimes you're not going to get it just right the first time, but you need to get started and you need to figure out along the way what is the right step for you, what's the right step for your program, what's the right step for the governance structure you have, for the funding you have, all those sorts of things. But that's where we are in Alabama. Trying to think if we've left anything out. We just, through legislation, were given a mandate for a certification for public safety telecommunicators, and they were categorized as such in the state of Alabama just this in the last couple of months. So we're biting into the certification too. So that's very exciting for me. Coming from a PSAP, I never went to training. I never was sent to training by my organization. So I'm very excited that that's been one of the initiatives in my tenure here, that we get to invest in the human resource capital that we have in our centers.
Yeah, I was the same way. No one ever sent me to training. It was those monies were reserved for others in the agency. We'll just put it that way.
I think every one of us would argue our human resource capital is the most valuable capital in any one of our centers. And although I don't work in a center anymore, I still am a huge advocate that it takes the continued training and investment in our people so that we can continue to serve our communities to the best of our ability. And if we're not willing to do that, it's a real detriment to that service level.
Yeah, and I'd like to hit on something that Leah said. you know, she refers to perseverance, and sometimes you have to try something and then make changes. And as I mentioned, we started our journey in 2008 with an EZNet to connect our 40 plus PSAPs and IP call handling equipment. And that was pretty new and crazy at that time. And in 2011, when we tried to implement core services, we learned that the roadblocks were indeed too steep at that time. It was maybe too early in the early adopter life. And so we ended up implementing a hybrid solution. So we had to keep the legacy selective router at the beginning, but then the calls would be transitioned onto our core services. So we did the GIS work, you know, back in 11, but we couldn't do the full i3 solution, to Sandy's point earlier. And so today we are in an RFP to replace those next gen core services with the full deal, the whole i3, and with the aggregation that we weren't able to do before. And I think my words of encouragement are just, don't give up. Our paths are all going to be different, and there's no right or wrong. There's a right or wrong for you. But if you don't take that first step and do something, then you'll never be able to make it to the end. So I would just encourage everyone to do something in their journey to next gen.
Well said, Christy. Well said.
Yes, ma'am. And because you know what's funny is in my new role, I've had others ask me, well, what do you think of how this state's deploying it? And the first thing I say is, as an early adopter, I realized the glass house I live in, right? Because we were wanting to make things better, wanting to get rid of LATA boundaries, wanting to be able to connect calls better, needing to replace outdated equipment. There were things that just needed to get done, right? And moving towards NG9-1-1 was better than taking our very limited tax dollars and spending it on legacy. It just didn't seem smart. And so, yeah, I'm really glad to hear everybody is in the same mindset, right? As long as you're doing something better and moving forward. Now, so this is an important aspect that I think most don't realize, is that many times, and even to implement any of the components of NG9-1-1, it's learned that either current legislation, tariffs, procurement processes, funding, or even how 911 supported organizationally today, like the workflows and the processes, or do I even have the necessary agreements, that none of this actually either exists, or what does exist doesn't support moving to NG9-1-1. Monica, if you could lead the discussion, please discuss what efforts, if any, were taken to create the proper environment to support NG9-1 in Colorado.
Yeah, really. Thank you for that tee up, Sandy. I remember a couple of those conversations that you were referencing. We started in Colorado 6 years ago. We just now this year are fully deployed in our 86 911 centers in Colorado, just the EZNet, not core services, not any other i3 component. So much like Leah described, your tee up on the conversation of what a next gen environment looks like was really appropriate. But like I said, 6 years ago, we started sitting down and looking at the legislation. So Colorado, as you stated, is a home rule state. We are also governed through a Public Utilities Commission. That's how we're managed. So we're a tariff state on how 911 monies are utilized. And it took us 3 years of constant working with our legislature to get them to understand our legislation governing 911 in Colorado really hadn't been touched for probably 30 years, which is when I talk to colleagues across the country, that's a lot of our state of being. And because 911 can be so complex, it took a long time to educate our legislators. It took another 1.5 years of working with the legislators who were going to co-sponsor a bill. We obviously wanted it to be bipartisan and bicameral so that we have full support of the legislature and there would not be any infighting or distraction from what we were trying to accomplish. So finally, in that 5th year, we had good legislation that could be that was sponsored. We had enough conversations with the committee leaders. It just was a real grassroots effort. There was 5 or 6 of us, not just the Colorado 911 Resource Center, but our lead gentleman in the PUC, several influential directors in our state. We just took time to go to Denver, have the conversations, build on those conversations. It was labor intensive. I think if any one of you ever talked to Budge Courier in California, very much a similar journey, and getting the entire legislative framework restructured to support a next generation 911 system and environment. There were days that I didn't think we were going to do it. It wasn't going to happen. And we finally made it happen. And like I described, our system is deployed at the very basic level. We have a train track and no train. So now we have to build. I see Leah and Christy are smiling in agreement. It is a journey, and you can't stop. And it's really incumbent upon those of us who have been in some kind of leadership role in our states, whether you're an influential executive director or a director in your center, you work for your Public Utilities Commission, you work for a state administration office. You have to really work to continue to educate the legislators who support us, because it's not just this, it'll be the next thing and the next layer of technology and the next evolution of our industry that will have to keep them informed. So I really encourage people, once you build those relationships, you don't just stop. You have to continue to keep the legislators engaged so they understand everything that's happening in the space. It will help you so much more as you advance the cause.
Yeah, and I think that it's not just our legislators that applies to, Monica. That's such good advice. And I know our biggest challenge in 2011 was with our regulatory body, our Public Utilities Commission. And it was the same kind of principle where we had to develop relationships and we had to push past the roadblocks. But the reality was we went to our incumbent telephone company who said, absolutely not. We will not aggregate calls for you. And that was important to us so that we could have a next generation system. And so we went to the PUC and they told us that we would have to become a certified telecommunications provider, and that required a lengthy certification process. So that's when we had to Leah's point, change our plans, modify our plans, and move into a hybrid situation. But you just can't let those things get you down. You got to keep going. And I know that we also had struggles with funding because at the time we were part of a state agency, and every 2 years they reset our finances. In other words, we went to zero every 2 years. And so we didn't have the ability to save up for a next generation system. So we had to do a phased approach. And actually now in hindsight, even if we would have had a capital recovery fund at that time, I really feel good about the phased approach because we were able to learn so much in every step of the process.
Yeah, I think in most states, the people I've spoken with, Christy, everybody's had to do a phased, much like, you know, how we work to educate the legislators and get the legislation restructured. We then had towards the end of that effort, we had to start working with the Public Utilities Commission. I was really proud of the work that we did in Colorado. They had multi-day sessions where we educated the commissioners on how the tariff needed to be structured as the next gen deployment evolved. So that we weren't coming back and re-educating and asking for more money every 2 or 3 years, because that's frowned upon, right? So, but it started with the legislation. And again, you have to stay engaged with those folks as well as your Public Utilities Commissions, just because the technology is changing so much.
And Monica, I thought I even saw some recent legislation where GIS had to get worked into the legislation as one of those things you could actually spend money on. Because historically, 911 legislation didn't allow that, right? It was equipment, network components, your ALI, your MSAG, but even if you tried to justify that the GIS was taking the place of ALI and MSAG because it was written so specific to a legacy environment, there was no way for state leaders or in Chrissy's scenario or yours to be able to say, here, I can pass through funding to you to help you even get, on board to participate with us.
That's absolutely correct. And really, as in most of our states, and being home rule, several of the counties they've had no resources to evolve their GIS database. So the state has had to come in and try to assist in those areas. I see Leah shaking her head. As a funny point, there's in some counties in my state, there are more antelope than people. So they need as much help as we can give them. And, through the work with the Public Utilities Commission, we established an internal grant program so that those tariffed monies could be given for efforts like updating their GIS database. So it's a lot of work, but it's well worth the effort.
Leah, did you want to jump in here on this one?
It is a lot of work, and I could tack onto these ladies' stories about the PSC, the legislature, the law, the statute needing to be changed, all of that. Just don't stop moving. If you even if it's a crawl, just don't stop moving, because all of these things, all of these piece parts are what it takes to continue to march towards Next Generation 911 as a whole. And there's no right order necessarily. There's no right time frame. There may be no right price tag even. Just put it all together to the best of your abilities and have that core group of folks that help you march towards that, because you can't do it alone, and you have to not stop. You'd have to just keep going. So,
and I think initially when we all started talking about NG9-1-1 20 years ago, I think we were naive in that we didn't think about all of these extra components that we had to work on in order to make it a success in our individual states. I mean, I can remember sitting down in the early 2000s at the state level, just as an interested director, and go, okay, what do we got to do? Oh my gosh, okay, we have to, first, let's look at the legislation. And then it's just all of the piece parts, and you have to persevere. You have to keep going. You have to keep it in the forefront of all of their mind.
And to be honest with you, there's been GIS people even in my space where they're like, man, Sandy, I've been trying to get this done from a GIS perspective for decades. And it's finally the right conversation with the right people, with the right technology to move this forward. So it's not about, is this an old conversation? It's sometimes that old conversation just needs the right environment to actually flourish. Miss Leah, I think I jumped over you there, dear. Did you want to share one more thing?
I may have forgotten what I was going to say.
Lord knows.
It'll come back through, maybe.
It will. I'm sure it will. Okay, so Christy, why don't we jump over to you then? And so some have found many challenges to planning and implementation of NG9-1-1, all these things that we're talking about now. And for some of them, just knowing where to get started is actually the biggest challenge. What is one of the biggest challenges you've faced from a public safety or GIS perspective in the planning and implementation of NG9-1-1, and why was it a challenge? I mean, you've identified a lot of them, but if you had to pick one.
Well, I can't pick one, but I can pick two and go really quickly. The first one would be, in general, for public safety, is the legacy mindset, not the systems, not the equipment. The technology is out there, guys. It's not the technology that's holding us back. It's the mindset that why change it? Why fix it if it's not broken? We have a very reliable system. The future is unknown with new technology. So I think that's been the biggest general challenge. But with GIS, I think we have a unique situation where we have 14 counties in our region, and each county has a county coordinator that traditionally did rural addressing. And when we moved into digital mapping, those people de facto became our GIS professionals, except that they weren't GIS professionals. And so having people on a local level, many without any GIS training, responsible for core requirements, like when we implemented the core services in our ECRF back in 2011, we had to have a 98% accuracy, but that was not within our control because we had these people in the counties that were responsible for it. And I think that we probably I don't have the answer and the big solution, but I think our biggest plus is that we form strong relationships with those people and that we provide the training that you guys have talked about with call takers also to these rural county coordinators who were responsible for GIS. And once we told them about the big picture and that GIS used to be a nice to have and now it's a must have, they really bought into how important the work that they were doing mattered. You know, it wasn't just connecting a street segment, it was potentially getting a 911 call to the right place at the right time.
Leah, Monica?
I can't really add anything to what Christy said, except to say that meeting the expectations of the public, we've had to change our mindset. They have expectations, and they don't think about 911 until they need it. And you've got to anticipate those needs and be prepared for them so that you meet the expectations of those that you serve. That is the public largely, but it's also the folks out in the field, it's the people in the center. It's that whole environment, that whole ecosystem that you have to meet those expectations of. So she's absolutely right. You have to anticipate what those needs are and think about them ahead of time and listen to all those folks that you communicate with and make sure you're taking their needs into consideration and listening to their ideas, because that's where we get the ideas for most all of our successful programs here at the office. Is all of our statewide programs, people say, hey, we need such and such, or hey, we have this problem. And at the very least, we can marry those two agencies or those two organizations up and say, you're facing the same problem. Go talk about this. But it's changing minds and hearts, but it's the mindset that's the hardest thing, because, you know, coming from 911 in the 911 center, if I can't wrap it up and dispose of it within 90 seconds, sometimes I don't have the long suffering to get through it, but you have to have that.
I really like how Christy described it as a legacy mindset. And it has never been more prevalent to me in my career than it is now, working for a technology company and really understanding the capabilities of the technology, and that frankly, it's the human component that in our business is the biggest problem. It's probably the same in any industry, but it's the human factor that is predominantly the challenge. The technology will do what it says it's going to do. And I really like Leah's description. You really have to be engaged with all of your stakeholders. And if you are not doing that on a regular kind of cadence within your community, within your sphere of influence, then you're not going to be successful. And that's of critical importance.
See, and I really loved how Christy said that these de facto addressing people became GIS, because I remember someone at my state said, "Oh, Sandy, you could do GIS." And I went, "There are bachelor's degrees associated with that." That is not me. I mean, because we did our first GIS project when I was a county coordinator back in 2004. And then all of a sudden I was thrown into this, I'm responsible for GIS, and I had to put in an enterprise network to push out mapping. And this is legacy. And I remember sitting in one of my PSAPs, and I'm trying to update the map, and I broke it. And I was sitting there and I was talking out loud. And I remember I was sitting in records, and they said, "Sandy, you're not hoping I'm going to answer you, do you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just hoping I'm sending it up to God and hoping they'll send me an answer, because I'm a dispatcher. How did I get here to where I'm now, doing GIS and pushing out maps and trying to load it in every piece out?" I only had 9, right? I mean, but how do I do all that? And then of course left there and called my state office and said, you need more support. I can't do this. This is not me, right? I don't know if that means better agreements or what, but this was legacy, just trying to support in, wireless phase 2. This isn't what we're trying to tackle today. And so we actually have a question, and it's someone actually asking about Alabama and Colorado's experience specific to helping counties with their GIS other than money. And this will actually, Leah, go into what was going to be the next question. So GIS traditionally by PSAPs, we've been using it a long time, even if we didn't realize it, right? So even that discussion of 2004 did a GIS project to support wireless phase 2 and then voice over IP. Remember when that was the worst thing we had to worry about? But we've for a long time, we use it in our CAD systems, right? For location verification, dispatching of field units. We use it in AVL systems. I think that part of that education is letting our dispatchers know you do GIS, even if you don't realize it. What efforts have been taken to educate both public safety and GIS professionals about the new business need? And I think you've touched on this a little bit already. And then what new relationships have you forged at state and local levels to support GIS needs? To go back to Dan's question, I mean, where you couldn't help out with money, where have you been able to help out?
So where we started largely was money. It's no secret that all of us just wrapped up the performance period for the federal grant dollars for bridging the gap in NG9-1 implementation. So in Alabama, it was largely money to start with. We also I gave one of the first seminars or presentations in April of 2014 about GIS, and I don't GIS. However, that's when we started asking our stakeholders, hey, you have data, can we take a look at it? I might not know what I'm looking at, but we need to start sharing this. And I remember sitting in the seat, and they came, and whoever they is, the illustrious they, came and put this map and said, now you're phase 2. And I was like, I just query the caller. I mean, but that was GIS, and I didn't know. But through our CAD programs, the municipality that I worked for had a pretty robust GIS department, still has a pretty robust GIS department. And through working with them, I gained a little bit of their trust to maybe, place some dots and move some maps and things whenever I found an issue with CAD in our CAD program. We also were able to work with the planning department, who issued all the addressing, did the plats for developers and all of that. We in 911 did none of that, but used it daily, used it 24/7 as far as, the AVL and the vehicles, all the drivers for the CAD programs and the like. But I'm kind of ping ponging between kind of 2 questions, but that's how we used it. And then I got here to the state program office, and I was the only one with any PSAP experience, the only one. And I was like, I don't know this stuff. I didn't do this stuff. I didn't know this stuff. So here in Alabama, what we've done is we established a GIS program here in our office. Right now, it's a program of 1, but we have a GIS program manager that was hired about the time that we were taking responses to RFPs for our GIS work here in the state of Alabama. We've grown that program. We're about to be a program of 2 as far as GIS professionals in the state of Alabama. We've engaged with our vendor to do a number of workshops with our stakeholders here in Alabama. We've told them, just like you guys have already described, we know that you used to assign addresses, but guess what? We're about to learn something new and fun and different. I won't even say bigger or better, but just different. But that's one of the things that we've had to do is take into consideration that the job descriptions and job duties of some of those people within those centers, it's outside the realm of expertise, and it's outside the realm of experience. It's not that they can't learn, but they've never been asked to do that before. And then you have to bring them along with you as far as, this is how we get this legacy, tabular, whatever, into this next generation 911 spatial concept. And this is called this, and this is called this, and this is the same thing. It just acts a little differently and dips different places and those sorts of things. So we've had to have massive education campaign. And the tool set that our vendor has brought to the table just overwhelmingly has been accepted by our stakeholders as, dare I say, fun to use and easy to use. So that's one thing that you need to take into, Alabama took into consideration as far as making certain we gave the right tools to do what they needed to do.
And Sandy, in Colorado, I'll say that the municipality that I worked for, we actually had a really well-educated GIS. I'll call him a tactician. He was well-versed in it. In the early 2000s, when we knew we were going to be migrating to a next-gen platform, we actually got him engaged in the GIS working groups through NINA. And he became like a one-man roadshow in Colorado and educated the other GIS folks around this state. In Colorado, because we're home rule, those of us who are in more rural counties, we share information, we share resources, we help each other wherever we can. And there was no money. So this gentleman would single-handedly, in the western half of our state, go to those communities with the support of his leadership out of their pocket and go educate those folks. We stood up many, what I called addressing units across the state that included county assessor offices, the planning department, the U.S. Postal Service, to teach everybody the format that addressing needed to be organized into to better support the next gen environment. Mm-hmm. And we started that probably in 05, 06. And it took a lot of time. And I will say, I believe there's still one county in our state that is struggling, but we, without money internally, we shared information, shared resources, being the human factor, the people, to go into their system. And then probably sometime in 2011, 2012, we got the state GIS office involved to help support those counties that really had no GIS. I mean, we had folks who had dispatchers who were managing their MSAG. So we're all shaking our heads because we know that exists. And we had convinced those decision makers at the state level that, look, the county does not have, or the municipality does not have the resource nor the skill set that is going to take to bring that locality's GIS database up to the standard it needs to be at in order to be part of this network. So again, work, relationships, conversations, constant. But that's how we did in Colorado. There was finally in 2012, 2013, the state, through the state office, threw some money at the effort, and we're closer than we've ever been before.
Christy, did you have anything to offer?
Well, they were very comprehensive in their answers. The only thing I could possibly add to that would be relationship with vendors. You know, we found that a lot of the smart city initiatives were technology that were all based on GIS, but they weren't including 911 PSAPs into the mix. And so we've done a great deal of research to find startups, innovators, different types of vendors that have the ability to improve the GIS user ability and ease of use for our telecommunicators, and developing relationships with those vendors, as well as vendors that provide subscriptions to imagery and IoT providers.
I think the partnerships and the cost sharing that could potentially happen going forward is going to be important. I mean, in our legacy environment, we were the only one that was supporting the MSAG and doing all that, right? So all of our monies from an I-1 perspective had to go to that. Where we're partnering with so many other stakeholders, there's no reason that we can't cost share. Why is the burden exclusively 911? I try to share that thought with as many people as I can, especially when grant funding comes through. Like in Arizona, we took advantage of broadband funding back when it was the MAP 21 days, because they needed address points, and so did we. We partnered with our DOT because they needed row center lines. I'm sorry, MAP 21 was DOT to meet those federal requirements, and we had it. We just didn't have it for everybody, and it needed to be improved. So I think that there are ways that you can optimize on that. But as you're spending grant dollars, you have to talk about what is my long-term maintenance from here, because grant dollars are going to get me so far, but it doesn't keep the lights on. I don't know if that's a good way to describe it. Dan, I hope if you're still with us, I hope that answered your question at all. If not, and Christy, the only reason he didn't ask about you is like, I know her and Roger, and I know what they're doing, but I'm not sure what Alabama and Colorado are doing. Okay, so Christy, let's shift a little bit, and this is going to be into the team building and mentorship and career building. So as of 2022, employees from 4 generations are active in the workplace, and many of them work together on the same team. You have the baby boomers, you have Gen X, you have millennials, you have Gen Z, and the millennials and Gen Zs are probably challenging us the most, right? As far as how what are we doing and why are we doing it? How have you cultivated the varying experience of multi-generational environment, and what would you say has been the biggest success of that?
So I do have a good example for that. I'd love to tell you that I just have so much wisdom that I fixed this, but that's not the way it happened at all. It was an organic solution, but especially in the area of GIS, we saw that our team members were getting younger and younger because they were graduating with those degrees that you referenced earlier, Sandy. And we did start to experience some personnel issues. And so we were doing research and brainstorming different things that we could do. And meanwhile, I had our data team that was an older, more experienced generation or generations. And they were really looking for ways to contribute because the old database was moving away and we were transitioning into the spatial world. And I just encouraged them to work with the GIS folks on their history and all the things that would help them understand the big picture that they didn't know coming fresh out of college. And so they started having weekly calls with these young folks in our GIS team, and something magical happened. And in my one-on-ones with everyone, I started hearing feedback about how helpful those conversations were and how wonderful it was that Leanna and Melissa could bring that experience and help them see the big picture. And then from the other side, I started hearing comments from the data team about the innovative minds of these younger folks that had started working in our department. And so we decided to focus on the common ground. And for us, that was our core values. Everybody had a heart for service, and everybody had courage to innovate, and they all had this can-do attitude. And so with that common ground, we've actually started blending the teams and pairing up these different generations, so that today, one of those folks that was just mentoring and teaching history is actually supervising a team of GIS specialists, and they're now the geodata team. And they just learn from each other on a daily basis. And instead of seeing conflict, we are seeing creativity and innovation, and something that the older generations have been able to pass on is the importance of relationships. And yes, in GIS, we could do it all remotely with those county addressing officers. But you know what? If you take the time to drive out there and take them to lunch and ask about their family, you establish this rapport and you establish relationships. And that's what gets the work done. And that's what makes us successful. So I feel very blessed to have had an organic solution to a problem that I was struggling with.
Just to kind of piggyback on what Christy's saying, Christy really leads the way in really encouraging her people to be involved. And in some environments, leadership doesn't necessarily promote that kind of interaction. And it's really heartbreaking to see organizations that suffer from that. But it's very refreshing to have somebody of Christy's caliber really leading the way in that regard, and showing folks that if you just encourage the conversation, at the end of the day, as humans, we all just want to be heard. We want to have a voice at the table. And if you create an environment that does that, and much to Christy's example of, starting that with your core values, you all have agreed upon something, and the core values of your organization are a great place to do that. And really, to her point, magical things can come from those kinds of dialogues. So I just wanted to add that 2 cents.
Now, we did have someone send in a question, and they've, bless their heart, have had a hard road. So it says, I began working as an EMT and firefighter, then moved into dispatching. In 2 months, I was promoted to be the county mapping coordinator. I'm 6 months in and working on 2 weeks of haphazard training. Bless your heart. I'm laughing with you because we've all been there. Having next to no knowledge, I've been tasked by my director to find some ideas for next steps as we move toward NG9-1 on how to educate myself. Would you recommend an experience-based approach or academic? I don't know if there's an academic approach to this, to be honest with you. There isn't any, there's no, other than the E&P, the emergency number professional certification. Thoughts?
Here's what I always tell anybody. There's no easy answer to these kinds of, especially in the 911 industry. I have, through my entire career, all of my professional experience, find the people who are doing it right. Find the people who are doing it best and talk to them. They are always more than happy to share what they've done, how they've done it, any experience, any information they can pass along. And again, it just goes back to the human relationship. Find the people who are doing it the best, ask them what they did, how they did it, how did they learn it, how did they, whatever the steps were that they took to evolve in that skill set, and model it.
I don't know that we're doing it the best or right, but we're doing it in the state of Alabama. And one thing that I would like to offer, and he's a few offices away and listening, but I would offer our GIS professional here in the office that this person could reach out to. And I can provide his email address, or I'll attempt to type after I'm done talking. But that, just what Monica said, reach out to people that are doing it and ask those questions. My GIS professional here in this office comes from a local government to the state board office. And that's one of those things, you tap into that resource any chance you get, regardless of if you're doing it the same way, regardless of if it's regional, like Christy has described, regardless of if it's a statewide deployment or if it's just a PSAP deployment or a local government deployment, it doesn't matter. But that the lessons learned are pretty applicable on just about any level. So I think I'm going to wrap up talking and then go type and see if I can provide the email address of our guy, and you can at least reach out to him for the person that asked the question.
And then as well, so folks, just for those that don't know, Datamark does free monthly webinars on all types of GIS topics. We have a YouTube channel where a great deal of what we've done is already recorded and sitting out there, whether it's GIS for the public safety professional, where it's a beginning conversation to help GIS or public safety professionals understand GIS, or more sophisticated topics on sub-addressing and how do we do this, right? So I would encourage you to go look. I mean, Datamark, our philosophy is we educate first. Knowledge is power, and we want you to feel powerful in the spectrum, because like everybody shared, it's doable with the right knowledge and the right people and the right early adopters showing us, you know, how it can be done. It doesn't mean that is the way it is done, right? We have about 4 minutes left. This has been fantastic, but I do want to ask Monica this. And actually, this is true of all of us, and I'm not trying to call us out, but so all of us have been in this 9-1 industry for several years, if not decades. And we watched so much change that's happened over the years. And to go back to what the question was, there's not a 9-1 degree necessarily, right? We gain our knowledge in little places over, and generally majority of it's been experience. Most of my learning has been from screwing up, and I learned from it, I failed, and I moved forward. So, and part of, honestly, the success in my life has either been because of my husband, who has always believed in me, or I've had these really fantastic champions in my life, right? Men and women who have just said, I see something about you. Let's pull you forward and let's continue this conversation. So Monica, if you can start this off, if someone asks you about your success, about your path, what percentage of your success would you say was luck, hard work, or having the right champion?
I
know, that's a tough one.
I don't believe any of it is luck. I don't. I think if you apply yourself and you reach out and you build the right relationships. I saw somebody's comment in there about mentorship is the way. I know Christy better than I know Leah, and I know Christy is a huge advocate of mentorship. I was promoted in my prior profession early on at the age of 21, and I was blessed to have a person mentor me early on in that journey. And I have believed in having a mentor. I still have one today. No matter what stage in your professional development you're in, they play an invaluable part of helping you navigate what your road looks like. I truly don't believe any of it's luck. I think it's hard work and putting in the time, educating yourself on whatever it is that you're trying to become better at. I don't know if somebody else wants to chime in. We're advocating a lot for mentorship through NENA, the National Emergency Number Association. I think it's really important. It's incumbent upon us that are in leadership type roles to encourage the next generation of folks to not just take our jobs, but to be more successful than we ever were, to be wildly successful. I hope I answered your question, Sandy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Christy, what about you?
Well, I just want to tag on to what Monica said, because it brought to mind a day years ago in Colorado and Denver, having lunch with a Monica that I didn't know very well at the time, where she just had this passion and she said, I want to do more. I want to do more. And we have just all seen the more that she has done. And it's because she had that heart for service and she pursued it and she took the initiative. And so I feel like as leaders, we need to have the willingness to serve each other and to lift others up so that we're a group of many leaders that have a servant's heart and can make 911 better than it is today. And so I just applaud everything you've done since that day, Monica.
Leah?
So if you've ever seen me give a presentation, particularly about my journey, I've always said that luck favors the prepared. I almost flubbed that up, but luck favors the prepared. And that's not to say that you don't get lucky sometimes, because I have found myself in places where I thought, oh, okay, well, this is cool that I'm here. But I will tell you, luck favors the prepared. Be prepared, put in the work. Just what Christy said, there's so many of us that are so service oriented here, and you need to be among other service oriented people that are willing to challenge you. I have a current board member and a mentor. He said, I'm most interested in hearing your opinion when you disagree with me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, that's hard. That's hard for me. But you want people to challenge you, to ask those questions, to say, is there a new way to do this? I think Christy said this earlier. The technology's there. The technology's easy. It's the people that we have to bring along with us. And that's what we have to do, is continue to grow that community and make certain that we're incorporating all of that along the way. And mentorship is a huge, huge part of that.
And then the only thing I'd offer is, and I'm very comfortable with this, is be brave and say, hi, idiot in the room, I don't understand, right? Because I do it all the time. I'm like, because if I don't understand, then someone else in the room probably doesn't understand, right? And be brave enough to say, hi. I used to tell my technology folks, bring your crayons, you're gonna draw me a picture, right? Because that's not who I am. But I'm willing to learn, and I want to learn from you, and I surround myself with people smarter than I am. Ladies, that was fantastic. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us today. I loved the conversation. I hope all of our attendees did as well. I just want to encourage everybody, we are doing a Who is Your 9-1 GIS Superwoman awards. We are giving out awards in the areas of leadership, engagement, emerging professional, innovation, and team building. Please nominate your 911 GIS Superwoman. These awards will be given out at the closing ceremony at NENA 2022 at the Kentucky Derby Museum. Yay, that's going to be a lot of fun. Please join us there for the closing ceremony, and we hope to see all of you at NENA 2022 in Kentucky. Thank you, ladies. Really, truly appreciate it.
See you guys soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.